Hi everyone, it's Andrea Edwards and welcome back to part 2 of We Need a New Middle Class Dream, and this is section 10. 10. I never knew I was going to go that far, but anyway, here we are. I've been trying to really show everyone the scale of the challenge that we face and what we can do about it by section, and then in the big finale, which is next, part 3, I'm really going to go into that, and that's going to be very much a big picture view of what we need to change right across the board. So it's big. I know it's overwhelming. I've tried to break it down so it's not so overwhelming, but we need 1 billion people shrinking their lives massively. And then we need to be recruiting 3 to 4 more people each to join us. And then we're going to have the tipping point we need to drive the changes from the middle. Because as we're seeing, businesses, governments, everyone, the media, they're just not doing what they need to do. So today we're going to talk about the waste crisis. And as you'll see, I'm really, really passionate about this topic for very good reason. And it's something we really do need to get a handle on, and very, very quickly. All right, let's get stuck in. The waste crisis. Boy, have we got ourselves into a very, very, very big mess here. Plastic waste is expected to double by 2030 and triple by 2050. But some say its growth is going to be even higher than that. And I'm going to share as much information on that as I can. We have to address this. It is completely out of control. And I am living in the part of the world which is most impacted by colonial waste as well as local waste. But as we're seeing, what gets dumped over here doesn't stay here. The rich countries are now starting to be confronted with the impact of their excessive waste. And it's not pretty, something we know very well here in the global south. The other critical issue is we are now starting to understand the impacts on humans and all other life on Earth from the toxins in this waste. This is part of the novel entities discussed in the 9 planetary boundaries in part 1, and it is really doing great damage to us and to all other life that we share this planet with. Of all the challenges, this feels like the most overwhelming, but we have to address it, and at scale. There's nothing else we can do now. We've just got to get stuck in. But it needs everyone on board. No one is going to come and save us, and they're certainly not going to clean up this mess. We all have to do it together. We're all responsible. We need to get the job done. You're middle class and you have a disposable income. Well, we all have to start taking responsibility for our consumption waste, and we've got to get a handle on it. The best place to start is to ban all single-use consumer plastic. But of course, there's going to be some exceptions to single-use plastic, like in the medical industry, where we're going to have to keep using single-use plastics. But it's a tiny fraction of the global plastics crisis. Every one of us has got to start committing to do everything in our power not to buy any product that takes years, decades, or even centuries to break down. We are leaving absolute poison for future generations to deal with and be impacted by if we don't start acting now. It's time to ban all single-use consumer waste, and it is time for a massive revolution. This isn't just about banning straws and plastic bags. This is all single-use plastics. Any drinks in plastic bottles, plastic containers, takeaway containers, packaging in the supermarkets, cheap toys, and on it goes. There's so much that can be banned and taken out of the system. There is no question fishing waste pollution is a huge issue. It is estimated that 50% of plastic waste in the ocean comes from fishing nets. But other reports also say that 50% of the plastic waste in our oceans is from tyre dust. That's why replacing cars with EVs is not a good decision, because the heavier cars will create even more waste in the environment. Regardless, we've got to address it all. This is probably one of the greatest challenges humanity has ever faced, and truly it's mind-blowing we ever allowed it to get this bad. But we did. So what are we going to do about it? When people or deniers in other parts of the world say the waste crisis is fabricated or the images are fake, I always call them out. One example is Patrick Moore, former president of Greenpeace, and now actively working against nature. He says the waste crisis is fabricated from his home in Canada, and that the animals with plastic in their bodies are staged photos. Sure, Patrick. Come to my beach. I'll take you out and I'll show you the animals that are being found with plastic waste in their stomachs. There is no faking this crisis. It's beyond crisis point already. So this photo is from 2018. They're also little then. But ever since I saw the piles of rubbish washing in to Phuket during the off season, I've been taking the kids out to clean it up every year, every week. I could show you thousands of photos and videos from our cleanups, or the hundreds of amazing people across Phuket doing this every week, even in the extreme heat we've been dealing with lately. None of us can bear seeing something so beautiful covered in waste. How can anyone walk past it? And yet I see people walking past it all the time. So people like me and people right across our community, we're all committed to doing our part. And the best part is it really encourages others to join in. It's been really beautiful and amazing to watch the momentum build. Foreigners and locals alike coming together and cleaning up the environment. But it's not enough just to clean it up. We need a system in place across the world to deal with the crisis. And we have to stop the fire hose of waste that's entering our environment every day too. One of the biggest challenges I set for our team of beach cleaners was the rope monster. I saw it come onto the beach every year for about 4 or 5 years, always in the same spot, and it would stay there for the whole season, and then it would wash back out to sea. And I finally said enough. Every time I saw it, I just felt so hopeless because there was no way I could move anything that big off the beach by myself. So it was finally time to call in the troops. And as you can see here, they're a little bit bigger than in 2018. About 20 people got involved, and it took us about 3 weeks to get it off. And in this picture, you can see my two sons and their pals. And Freddie the dog gets a bit chopped off, but he was good company too. The rope monster was absolutely massive, and it was deep in the sand too, so it took a lot of effort to get it out. As I said, it took us 3 weeks to chop it up and get it off the beach. It was a momentous effort, and we eventually found a place to send the waste to be recycled, which was a big relief. We always wanted to make sure it could go where it could be recycled. And I can tell you, by the time that we finally got this finished, it felt very good getting this job done. Really want to encourage everyone to ask yourself the question, is there something you're sick of seeing in your environment that you can do something about? Sometimes I think that we forget that we can be the drivers of change we are looking for. Whatever the issue, bring a group together and solve it. We've seen the beaches across India and Indonesia cleaned by volunteers, and it often starts with one determined person. Be that person and be the leader the world needs to see right now. This problem is too big to solve without everyone coming together and working together. No one is coming to save us. We really do need to start to understand that. Equally, all you need to do is look at this image and understand that the waste crisis is now so huge. It's not just on the planet, but in space too. Humans seem to leave a mess wherever we go. Well, except for the traditional Indigenous communities, and guys, it's really time that we took inspiration and sat at their feet and learnt more about their ways, because they do have a lot of answers to the questions that we're asking ourselves right now. I showed a version of this a few videos ago, the linear economy. Right now, we have a linear process. This means we dig up resources, and for plastics, it's fossil fuels, but for other single-use items, it's trees or even food that is used to make things like pasta straws. We really do need to stop replacing single-use plastics with something else and instead take out all the unnecessary items from the system, because everything requires energy and resources to make, so replacement is definitely not the path forward. Resource extraction requires massive amounts of energy, water, and causes environmental destruction before it moves into production, which requires the resources extracted, more energy and water for the production, and it creates even more environmental degradation. After that, it's transported around the world by plane, ship, truck, train, car, bike, whatever, to shops and businesses, which adds to the overall emissions. We then buy it. And if it's a single-use item, it might be in our hands for minutes before we throw it away. Where it enters our environment, leaching its poisons into our land and waterways, breaking down over years, but some items will still be intact thousands of years into the future. Apple AirPods are expected to never break down. So will they become part of our stratigraphy? Looks like it. We cannot have a healthy planet with a linear economy. I hope everyone agrees with me there. And we should be out all on the streets fighting for a circular economy. In a circular economy, anything created must be made to last. And once it is finished, every part of it needs to be useful for something else, so there is minimal waste in the system. We need to clean up the mess we've already made, but we need to address this system and completely transform it, or we will soon all be awash in our waste and suffering from the higher rates of cancer, heart attacks, strokes, hormone disruptions, as well as the terrible impact on our natural ecosystems. Because it's not just humans suffering the impact of the waste crisis, all life suffers from it. This should be a non-negotiable as we plan for our future. But as I'll show you, it's not really even on the table yet. So where are we today? Well, plastic production has sharply increased over the past 70 years, as you can see here. In 1950, the world produced just 2 million tonnes. It now produces 450 million tonnes, and that's 22,400% growth since the 1950s. Incredible numbers, huh? Of the global plastic produced over the period from 1950 to 2015, 55% went straight to landfill, 30% was still in use, 8% was incinerated, and only 6 to 7% was recycled. Who are the biggest producers of waste? Science Advances recently released this report, and it's based on data from a 5-year, so 2018 to 2022, worldwide, 84 countries program to identify brands found on plastic items in the environment through 1,576 audit events. So it's very comprehensive. The researchers found that 50% of items were unbranded, calling for mandated producer reporting. The top 5 brands globally were the Coca-Cola Company, 11% of the waste, PepsiCo, 5% of the waste, Nestle, Danone, 3% each of the waste, and Altria, 2%. And this accounts for 24% of the total branded count, and 56 companies accounted for more than 50% of all of the waste measured. Let's quickly go through this Guardian article, which discusses the reports. Number 1, it starts stating fewer than 60 multinationals are responsible for more than half of the world's plastic pollution, with 6 responsible for a quarter of that. So we just looked at those 6. Number 2, a big focus of the report states that production really is pollution. Essentially, for every percentage increase in plastic produced, there was an equivalent increase in plastic pollution in the environment. Kind of makes sense, but it's creating a bit of an interesting conversation out there on social media. Number 3, the team collected and surveyed more than 1.870 million items of plastic waste across 84 countries over 5 years. The bulk of the rubbish collected was single-use packaging for food, beverage, and tobacco. Number 4, the industry likes to put the responsibility on the individual, say the study's authors, but we'd like to point out that it's the brands. It's their choice for the kinds of packaging they use and for embracing this throwaway model of delivering their goods. That's what's causing the greatest abundance of trash. Number 5, while many of these companies have taken voluntary measures to improve their impact on plastic pollution, the experts behind the study argue they are not working. Plastic production has doubled since the beginning of 2000, and studies show only 9% of plastic is being recycled. And number 6, the Ecuadorian ambassador to the UK said, the world is in a triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. While there are agreements in place for the first 2, we have no legislation, no global agreement on plastic pollution. It's pretty shocking to know that that's the case, right? And where does the biggest plastic waste come from? Packaging, all 143 million tons of it. All we have to do is look at the explosion of online sales, which is a huge part of this number today. After that, as you can see, it's building and construction. Just as a side note, I've tried to rescue styrofoam that's being dumped in the environment near my house at the moment, and it's construction industry people dumping it. It makes me so mad because it breaks up into tiny fragments and gets out into the environment in much bigger ways. Number 3 is other at 66 million tons. So that makes you wonder what that is. Then it's transportation. And number 5 is consumer and institutional products. So think of all those new fridges, TVs, couches, kitchens, phones, computers, and so on, that all of those new middle-class people are buying in numbers bigger than ever before. All of those industries are experiencing massive growth, as I've been trying to demonstrate in this series of 10 videos. And all of these products, no matter what we buy, comes in excess packaging. With packaging at number 1, here's a couple of news items, one from this year and another in 2020 from ZME Science, when it stated Amazon, considered the world's largest retailer, was responsible for 211,000 metric tons of plastic packaging waste. So that would have been from 2019. 10,000 tons, 22 million pounds, ended up in the world's freshwater and marine ecosystems. From a percentage perspective, that doesn't sound too high, but as we can see right across the board, we can't afford any more waste going into our freshwater and marine ecosystems. In the BBC article on the right, it reports that more than 3 billion trees are cut down every year to make the paper-based packaging that ends up cluttering our homes or stuffed in refuse bins. Equally, paper packaging production volumes have increased by 65% throughout the past 2 decades. And I'm going to talk about this more in a moment. But 3 billion trees are cut down every year to make the paper-based packaging. 3 million trees. We can't be chopping down more trees. And paper packaging production volumes have increased by 65% throughout the past 2 decades. So the first 2 decades of the 21st century have seen explosions across the board, and I believe that's why we are where we are today. Packaging is obviously a very complicated topic and challenge to solve, but there's also a lot of psychology around this. And we, the consumers, place more value on products that come in larger containers. So if you buy as a hairbrush and it comes in a really big box, in your mind, that makes that hairbrush more valuable. Crazy, huh? This is called packaging psychology, and companies are using it to their advantage. So I've said this before, but we've really got to understand our own psychology and work out how and where we are being manipulated, and then stop being manipulated by it. Just look at this visual representation of our waste. That's 2.2 billion tons in 2019 compared to 3.4 billion tons by 2050. And this is very conservative. Many experts are saying it will triple by 2050. So visualize 6.6 billion tons, and you can double that green box. And of course, if you look down to the right, that's the Burj Khalifa. So let's break it down a bit and see where it's all coming from. I showed this in part 1, but let's look at it again. This is how much waste in kilograms is produced each year by an average person in the most wasteful societies on Earth. Now we add in China and India. China had a wider difference due to the very, very different living standards for people and communities across the country. And with a population of 1.4 billion, it's critical that this doesn't grow. But India remains very low, and with a population also exceeding 1.4 billion, we really need to make sure it stays that way, but equally, we all need to join them. We can take a lot of inspiration from India and how people are personally much less wasteful. But we don't only need to do this so we can enjoy a cleaner environment. We need to do it because it is making us and all life on Earth very sick. A few years ago, the World Wildlife Foundation said we eat a credit card worth of plastic weekly, while also being told by other experts that there was no scientific evidence proving that plastics are bad for us. Well, the science is coming out now, and as you can see from these headlines, plastics definitely aren't good for us. Heart attacks and strokes, behavioural issues, including Alzheimer's, it really does impact older people more. Our babies are born with plastic in their bodies. Hormone disruption, cancers in multiple parts of the body, including under 50s having the highest rates of cancer diagnosis we've seen. And we are only going to learn more because this particular novel entity is everywhere. And that means we need to clean it up. We need to spend billions on research worldwide to overcome all of the challenges as we face here as a result of it. But the most important thing is we've really got to turn this tap off. You'd think with headlines like this, we might start doing something about it. But are we? Well, according to these 4 articles, it's a bit of a mixed response. So what's being celebrated, or perhaps not, is the Plastics Treaty's 4th Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee closed last week, and for the first time had a draft text outlining pathways towards a global agreement. The 2 factors came up in these talks. So first, let's focus on the Climate Home News article because it was published after the event and is a little more specific. The conclusion is hopes for a new global treaty to include limits on rocketing production of plastic worldwide have faded after government negotiators sidestepped the issue at the UN talks. At the 4th and penultimate round of talks, negotiations did not agree to continue formal discussions on how to cut plastic production before a final session in Korea set for September, making it less likely that curbs will be included in the pact. Environmentalists said the pathway to reaching a successful outcome in Korea looks increasingly perilous. Major oil and gas producing states like the US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran are all voting in favour of recycling over producing less. As we know, the fossil fuel companies are betting that as demand for oil and gas for energy falls, they can compensate by selling more of their products to plastic manufacturers. So working in our interest, as we can see. The talks were marred by complaints from scientists and campaigners that plastic industry delegates were harassing and intimidating them, while secretly funded pro-plastic adverts were placed around the venue by a right-wing Canadian lobby group. I definitely recommend looking into the results from these talks, but also be paying attention in November and do everything you can to fight for a global plastics treaty. The second point, of course, is lobbyists, which we've seen in huge numbers at the COPs too. The number of fossil fuel and petrochemical industry lobbyists increased by more than a third since the last one. 196 lobbyists attended these UN talks in Canada, which represents a 37% increase, which in turn was a 36% increase on the previous year's number. Increased plastic production is a major part of the fossil fuel industry's plans for the future, and any attempts to curb production, such as those being discussed at the UN talks, are an obvious threat to their profits. According to Carbon Tracker, BP expects plastics to represent 95% of net growth in oil demand from 2020 to 2040, and the International Energy Agency estimates plastics demand will make up 45% of growth for oil and gas mining to 2040. So they're determined to keep the plastic pumping, right? Graham Forbes from Greenpeace said, the influence and growing presence of fossil fuel and petrochemical industries are not what the people want, nor what the climate needs. The fossil fuel lobby is holding us back from negotiating a treaty that will end the plastics crisis. The UN member states must step up and deliver a global plastics treaty that will cut plastic production and end single-use plastic. I agree with you, Graham. My friends, we can't see the carbon in the air. but we can see the plastics in our environment. We have to defeat the people who are fighting to keep the tap on, because at this point in the game, they obviously do not care about us. As always, who is most impacted by this? The poorest. Well, for now. The interesting thing about plastic waste is once it gets in the water, it can go anywhere. And the dirge of waste we've experienced in the global south is spreading all over the world's beaches now. No one will be safe from the waste crisis. And this links to a massive issue called waste colonialism, and we need to stop it dead in its tracks. Waste colonialism is the dumping of waste in developing countries in the global south, something Australia has started to do again after they screwed up their recycling efforts. And until now, Germany is the largest waste exporter. But something worse is going on right at this moment. At the end of 2023, the EU announced it is banning member states from exporting its plastic waste to non-OECD countries, with a couple of small exceptions. But this won't come into force until 2026. And do you know what's happening right now? These EU countries are in a frenzy, shipping their waste to the global south before the deadline kicks in. So we're about to see a surge of waste in this region. The problem with waste colonialism is always that the countries it's being shipped to do not have the infrastructure to handle the waste, and it's a very corrupt industry. We need to set up an effective global waste management system, because dumping it over there doesn't mean it stays there. We really need to come together and start saying no to all single-use plastic, because the big polluters are not driving this change at all, and we can see that. We have to stop treating our world like a rubbish dump, because there is no way. The Earth is all we've got, and we've already seen what we're doing to space. Have we really lost all reason? The challenge is, for most people today, is that it feels pointless. But that's not a reason not to try. Every person who is out there cleaning our environment is making others see that it is something we can no longer accept, and that we must start doing something about it. Action creates more action. So if you're already doing it, keep going with your cleanups, share it passionately on social media, inspire other people to get involved, and let's build momentum. We have to make a stand here. We have to say enough is enough. We can't let the fossil fuel industry keep going the way it's going, nor the major plastic producers. We just can't afford it. We've also got to get realistic about the solutions being shared. So yes, to everyone who sent me this article and others like it, I've seen it, and I've seen stories like it for more than a decade. So where are all these waxworm farms devouring plastic? It's not happening, right? So none of this has happened at any scale yet. So it's hard for me to get excited about this news when I've been hearing it over and over again, because it's not new. We've been promised these sorts of solutions for a very long time. And where are they? Maybe the fossil fuel industry is behind these stories so that we can keep producing more plastic, just like they are behind the hydrogen stories. That's another topic. That wouldn't surprise me. We need to stop the problem, not find solutions and keep going with the same level of production. You see that, right? The other side, of course, is this is an ecosystem impact potential. So anything that we do that involves nature, we have to be very, very, very careful about, because there are potential wider ecosystem impacts, and they must be known and managed rather than going guns blazing into solutions that might create even more problems down the track. So that means no matter what we do, the most important job we have right now is to turn the plastic waste tap off. It's really our only choice now. But let me introduce you to a new frustration. Millions of people, probably billions, walking around with bags like this, feeling good about themselves because it's sustainable. It says it on the bag. But where does the paper come from? The material for the handle. Everything created requires resources and energy to produce. We can't replace what we're doing with sustainable alternatives, not all the time anyway. We have to stop producing unnecessary items, especially single-use items. So that's why I'm saying it's not just plastic. It's all single-use items, but plastics are worse because they hang around for longer. Although these are bad because they create deforestation. So another important point, the reason we're in this mess with plastic isn't because someone didn't care about the environment. It's because they really did care. In case you didn't know, in 1965, Sten Gustav Tulin patented the plastic bag with the intention of saving trees. Witnessing the devastation of forests to create bags for shopping, plastic bags came into our life. They were never intended as single-use items. As time went on and the manufacturing of plastic products became a multi-billion-dollar industry, the dark side of this magnificent material began to show its face, including the discovery of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 1997. And we still haven't changed anything. Can you imagine how soul-crushing it is for the people working on cleaning up the garbage patch, knowing that it's just going to keep at least staying the same size, if not getting bigger, because we're putting more and more waste into the ocean? It must be so demotivating for those guys some days. So today, we think paper bags are sustainable, but think about how many middle-class people we had in 1965. Today, we've got 3.8 billion people, and they're all using these paper bags, disposable coffee cups, straws, and all of the other single-use items. We have to stop replacing and start ending anything unnecessary. If we as a species can survive without stuff, then let's do that, because that's what we've got to do, is we've got to get rid of stuff, a lot of it. Here's another big pet peeve for me. So after the pandemic was over and the tourists started coming back, before the pandemic, I would occasionally see these cups. And since it was over, everyone is using them, including at the sit-in restaurants. This drives me nuts because they are everywhere in the environment. And it's 3 pieces of plastic, sometimes 4 if it's in a single cup bag, which you can see in the top middle. And that is really common. That's how they get them around on motorbikes, right? I see them breaking up on the beach instantly, and they're made of such poor material. So please, 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 please say no to these cups. Never accept to drink in these cups. 4 pieces of plastic. It's crazy. I was at an island for a kid's birthday party in Phang Nga Bay, and we stopped to get some drinks, and every single drink was served in these cups. Now, these islands don't have waste facilities, so they go into the environment, they get burnt, or they end up in the water. It had a sink, it had running water, so they're the sort of places that should definitely be having washable cups. But we've got to stop this. We've got to stop stuff like this. And since the pandemic was over, this has been one of the big plastic explosions I've seen, and it's really shocked me because I thought we were heading in the other direction where we were before the pandemic. Please say no to all single-use plastic. Don't buy from businesses that sell in these plastic cups. We are in a global mega waste crisis and have to do everything in our power to turn off the waste tap and clean up the environment. It is a horrendous what we are doing to our natural world. And it starts with our consumption habits, which is reflected in explosive business growth all over the world across all industries, especially in the last couple of decades. So, what are our options here? Well, number one is obvious: a global ban on single-use items, especially single-use plastic. We have to turn the waste tap off, and the best way to do this is to put in a global ban on single-use items, especially single-use plastic. We are being overwhelmed by this waste crisis. We can't keep adding to it and solve it at the same time. It's gone too far now. Number two, we need that global plastics treaty signed in November, which is committed to a significant reduction in single-use plastic. The lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry must have very little influence on this decision-making process too. These conferences are not giving a fair platform to the countries who are actually being impacted. Spokespeople from the global south are not in the rooms where decisions are being made, and this is at COPs too, and that means they have no influence on the outcome. The lobbyists are definitely in those rooms, and that needs to stop. If we reduce production, we reduce pollution. That is what the science is saying. So how about we follow the science? Number four, We need millions and millions, if not billions of dollars invested in global research focused on cleaning up the waste already in the environment, but also working out how to deal with the impact of that pollution. We do not have enough scientific evidence to show the harm being caused to our bodies, which needs to change. And we must address how to clean our bodies of this pollution, as well as the bodies of all other living beings, as well as in the environment itself. If we don't have a full grasp of the harm it's doing, not just to humans, we are gambling on a very, very challenging future for all life on this planet. We must accelerate the research to understand the full implications of plastics and what it's doing to us. And the fossil fuel industry cannot be behind any funding for that research. It has to be completely independent so we know exactly where we stand. I hope you agree with that. Number 5, we need to remove anything out of our system that exists for a few moments before it's discarded. That's a primary system change we must get to work on while understanding all the implications a decision like this might have, which could include things like massive job losses. So we need to get prepared for that and think it through. But I don't know, from my experience and from what I've been seeing, our leaders aren't very good at the thinking through bit. I want to encourage you to really think about your own consumption. For example, we buy a plastic bottle of water or soft drink, we drink it quickly, and then it's in the trash within minutes. Now, items like this can last in our environment for 500 years. We can no longer accept that as a way of life. I hope you agree. Surely there's just no way that we can justify it anymore. We can see the waste around us. It's everywhere. You can't escape it. We need to get people to see the waste in the environment. So I live in a country that accepts colonial waste until 2025 anyway, when it's supposed to stop. But the existing infrastructure cannot handle the waste produced locally, let alone additional waste from imports. This is also a country heavily reliant on bottled water because the water sources are now so contaminated, you have to buy your water. So what you see is people throwing rubbish into an already dirty environment because why bother doing anything else when it's all going to end up there anyway? I get it. I really get that. But we have to fight to solve this enormous challenge. And the best place to start is to actually see it and say, no, I do not accept it. And we have to convince our governments too. Corruption in the waste industry is rampant. The waste industry has always been a mafia-led industry, and this corruption still exists across the world today. So many communities around the global south have waste dumped into their local environment, poisoning the water, air, and earth, and they can do nothing about it. Too many hands have been paid under the table along the journey to that point, and the local people have no power and no voice. It is destroying the environment, and only a tiny few are getting paid, while everyone else suffers, gets sick, and dies. I've honestly never understood the sort of people that are capable of profiting and creating that destruction, but there we go. Global waste infrastructure. We have to set up global waste infrastructure everywhere across the globe. I believe that this infrastructure should be paid for by the fossil fuel industry and the biggest plastic producers I mentioned in that earlier report. And from what I've seen, I think we need about 1 incinerator for every 5 million people based on estimates. These incinerators have got to be high tech. They must not spew emissions, and the treated waste should not enter any environment. Destroying our waste is obviously not a long-term solution if we keep creating more, but the build-up is far too big now, and we need to deal with it as it is today, but also make sure we continue not to have more waste coming in the future. So this can't be an excuse to keep the plastic flowing. Number 9, we need to scale up waste solutions for the existing waste in our environment. As an example, if we can use our waste to make bricks or tiles so we can build our homes, then let's get on with it. We've got to be very wary about how we are using it today, especially in things like clothes, because that just means that more microplastics will continue to be released into our environment. So we've got to be smart in how we use this waste and turn it into something that is useful for humanity. So let's make sure that we're cautious about what we do. And when we decide the best paths forward, let's scale it up massively and get going. But we need to create a clean industry with any of the solutions we choose. We can no longer pollute poorer nations. That time has got to be over. Rethinking single-use waste. What can we do about it? So this is the you and I bit. First up, please start saying no to all single-use plastic, but equally just say no to all single-use items. We've got to get the waste out of the system because our planet has become a rubbish dump and we cannot continue as we are. We all know it. So start with yourself, just say no. And I can tell you it is incredibly liberating once you start doing it. If you say, I will not accept plastic, you'll work harder to find solutions, but also you'll get really positive responses for people when you say no plastic. Believe me, I've been doing it for a long time. Number two, we've got to work harder than everyone else to be sustainable and reduce waste in our lives. There's no question. So when you're shopping for food, think through the impact of the excess packaging that your items come in. Are there alternatives? It really starts to make you think and really think through. Of course, a lot of the alternatives are more expensive. Sustainability is a poverty issue, and we need to rectify that, but there are ways around it. Big bulk shops, the sort that businesses can buy from, often have less packaging. Farmers markets, local stores, there's a lot of options, but you've got to look for it. But you still have to work hard here. But the more of us who work hard to find more sustainable solutions, the easier it'll get for everyone to shop sustainably. Number three, educate your community. This is always a big one because honestly, as I said in the last one, people don't see it. I feel this unbelievable guilt if I have to accept plastic. Say I'm in a place where I need water and the only way I could get it is with a plastic bottle of water. It kills me. But this doesn't appear to be a widespread phenomena. People just don't see it. And that's always been a bit of a shock for me. So please share anything you're doing to reduce your impact and make sure you share it with love on social media. If you're finding sustainable solutions, but please do watch out for greenwashing. Let your community know and inspire them to follow your lead. Remember, we need to recruit 1 billion people in perfectly changing and doing better by our planet. Use your voice to help build that community and let's open eyes so all can see the abuse of this beautiful earth. A lot of this has got to start in the home. So one tip is sort your trash into clear plastic bags so recyclers can actually see what's in there. Wash out everything you use and then separate the waste at home. It is so much more effective if we do this at home. And also it will mean that you'll buy less waste because you don't like doing this bit. But versus us expecting it to be handled by the waste industry, especially as most of the workers get sick from the exposure to our waste. This is a revolting job to ask another human being to do, but it also means the vast majority of recyclable trash is missed and ends up in the environment. A really important tip is make sure you wash out any containers, especially if it's had food or beverages in it. Dirty containers have less chance of being recycled and it contributes to methane pollution too. Don't throw any food waste into the bin or any organic material, which includes things like paper and cardboard. They can all be recycled or sold if you're in a developing country. Compost, get a bokashi bin, feed stray animals or local wildlife if it's appropriate. But food in our landfills is creating massive emissions and we have to stop it entering these landfills in the first place. So that starts with us. So let's get better at sorting on the home front. Number 5, bring your community together and solve this problem locally. And then let's roll it up into a global movement, sharing best practices and inspiration. The greatest opportunity we have for the future is community action happening everywhere across the world at scale, addressing and overcoming the biggest challenges we face. The problem is too big for governments to solve now, and we know businesses aren't moving fast enough, and some don't want to move at all. They don't want to change. So it's really on us to push this fight to the end. We have to succeed for all of our sakes. You don't want to live in trash. Trust me, I have to face this every single day. Number 6, work with your local council, state and national governments. We can't solve this problem if the responsibility isn't spread to everyone. We need to partner with our elected officials and work with them to ensure we all succeed. We can't sit on our bums anymore expecting messes to be cleaned up by someone else. We need to get involved or we won't be successful. Get involved in beach cleanups or any cleanups. As long as the environment's getting a good cleanup, it doesn't matter where you are. Like many others, I am committed to cleaning our environment because I want my children and all children to know the beauty of a clean environment. I had clean oceans and rivers growing up, and I hate that our children do not. My children have never seen a clean beach or a clean river. That's just appalling. How can we accept this as parents? When you get out there and you start cleaning your environment, I promise you people will join you and it becomes quite social and you can make some new friends. So a great way to overcome loneliness if you're sitting at home. Everyone is looking for the leader the world needs to see right now. So why don't you be that leader? Let me know what you'd add to this list. Obviously, I could have kept going for ages, but I think the biggest opportunity that we have is to fight from the middle. 3.8 billion middle-class people coming together and saying, we do not accept this anymore. We're going to come together and solve these enormous challenges that we face. And the waste crisis is really out of control. All right, that's finally the end of part 2. We need a new middle-class dream. It's been done over 10 sections if you've had a chance to watch any of them, and it's covered population, homes, cars, white goods, food, fashion, war, technology, and finally, the waste crisis, although I did miss travel and tourism last time, yep. I never knew this would become such a big thing, but it's a complex situation that we're dealing with, and it could never be simple. I wanted to illustrate the scale of the issue that we face, and I hope I've achieved that for those who've joined me on this journey. I'm very much looking forward to pulling together part 3 of We Need a New Middle Class Dream. And I'm going to do that over the coming weeks because I think I'm going to approach it quite differently, because in this one, I'm really going to speak from the heart and the brain, whereas the first 2 sections I've really focused on a lot of data, which is talking to the brain, but we need to connect the heart to these conversations too. In part 3, I'm really going to go into the big picture solutions that I think we need to be looking at so that we can really start to grasp what needs to change and at what scale it needs to change. Because I think until we do that, we're still accepting the little bits of change that we're seeing going on around the world, and none of those little bits are going to make any difference. We need the really, really, really big changes happening now. So that's what part 3 is going to be about, and I hope it inspires you to get involved and be part of this. I believe that if we come together and work together, we can succeed, but we do need global cooperation on a scale never achieved before in human history, and we need everybody involved, no matter where they are on this planet. In the meantime, I'd love to connect with you, so please follow me on social media. You can see all my social media handles here. I'm more active on some than others, but I'd love it if you came and joined my Facebook group, 1 Billion People with Uncommon Courage. And let's come together and create a global community committed to action. As I said earlier, 1 billion people acting and driving change can create the human tipping point we need. Once we reach 1 billion people, we only need each person to recruit 3 to 4 more people each, and then we'll be in a position to have enough people to drive the runaway changes required. We also have to believe we can succeed, and then we've got to get to work. As we are seeing with all of the crazy extreme weather events going on all over the world right now, including living through a heat extreme for the last 3 months myself, it's time for us all to step up and be the leaders the world needs right now. And we need to envision a beautiful future that 1 billion voices can get behind. Please join this movement. We have to move now. I'd love you to join me on the journey. See you for the final part 3.